Alright, I'm late, but chill out, I actually have a decent excuse for once anyway. Hey there guys, I'm Will, welcome to FP1 and the Comedy Review, the series that makes you go to hell for laughing at jokes you probably shouldn't. Bit like this one. As I said, I've got a pretty good excuse for being so behind this week, as I was actually in Budapest with head out for the Grand Prix. That means a little bit of a different looking comedy review this week, but before we get into any of that, roll the intro. So of course, the first step of my Hungarian journey was to actually get there, which meant walking around Stansted Airport with my camera out, looking like a Logan Paul wannabe. As the bus driver left us at the mercy of Ryanair, let's talk about the news coming into the weekend. The big story, of course, being Red Bull giving Nyck de Vries depression. The AlphaTauri driver had struggled in the opening 10 races of the season, with Helmut Marko eventually getting sick and tired of the Dutchman, to the point where he considered a washed-up Daniel Ricciardo as a better option. Now, I've already clickbaited this topic to high heaven, so if you're interested in my thoughts in detail, you can watch that video after this one. For now, let's look at the other big story. F1's planned changes to the qualifying format for this weekend. Let's be honest, F1's attempts to improve arguably the one aspect of the sport that doesn't need improving haven't gone down very well with the fans, the drivers, basically anyone. Their experiment in Hungary was to fix the tyres drivers are able to use in qualifying, the compounds gradually getting softer as we progressed from Q1 to Q3. Many wondered if this might somehow impact the dominant performance of Red Bull. However, given Max Verstappen is very experienced with gradually going from hard to soft, sorry this video is sponsored, I can't say that. Also in the news, and it's that time of year again where hashtag Team LH fans waste their singular brain cell fuming about alleged cost cap breaches, with Red Bull rumoured to be among the host of teams who went over the limit in 2022. Personally, I don't believe a word of this. Given F1 are actually enforcing meaningful penalties this time round, Red Bull and their catering department are likely in the clear. Anyway, having touched down in a very sunny Budapest, it was time to explore the Hungaroring circuit. I started by roaming around the fan zone, where you can see F1's Net Zero show car, and if you look very closely, Nyck de Vries. Of course, F1 wasn't the only category in action on the weekend, with F3, F2 and the Porsche Super Cup making up the support bill. I had my camera out for these sessions and was extremely privileged to experience a Brad Benavides moment live at Turn 1. Back to the F1 action, and first practice would kick off in the dry, before getting very, very wet. Sergio Perez was more than capable of crashing before the heavens opened, however, and at this point we were expecting Ricciardo to be announced as a Red Bull driver ahead of FP2. With no more of God's piss forecast for the remainder of the weekend, the track remained relatively quiet, Carlos Sainz deciding to be brave and face the tricky conditions before making a tit out of himself. With time so meaningless, Stroll was in the top 3, let's move on to second practice, where the sun was back out and Leclerc was back bringing false hope to the Tifosi. He topped the session from Lando Norris in the McLaren, as Sergio Perez continued to do Sergio Perez things, and Alpine looked to have some strong form. I sure hope they don't end up imploding later on. Another driver who had a good session was Nico Hülkenberg. The German may have arrived at Budapest looking like he'd just entered his midlife crisis, but performed well enough for P6. As for Daniel Ricciardo, the new man at AlphaTauri could only muster P14. And on that note, let's just move on to FP3. This would see hashtag Blessed end the hour on top of the table, in the Mercedes he'd previously described as the worst he'd felt around the Hungaroring circuit. I was starting to think he'd swap places with Max Verstappen on Saturday, as the Flying Dutchman spent FP3 moaning about the balance of his Red Bull car. With neither Verstappen or Perez gracing the top of the timing sheets all weekend, could that open the door for a surprise contender during qualifying? Well, that contender definitely would not be Kevin Magnussen, who failed to make the cut in Q1. The Dane recently gave birth... Hang on, that doesn't make any sense. The Dane recently welcomed a new member to the Magnussen family, and if you do the math, 9 months takes you back to Brazil 2022. Looks like someone got a bit too excited after their pole position. Back to Q1 and it was full of shock exits, as Yuki Tsunoda found himself beaten by Daniel Ricciardo. Just give me a second to wipe the smug look off my face. And last year's pole sitter George Russell got involved in a play fight at the final corner, ending the session only 18th fastest. With another desk smashed at Mercedes, it was on to Q2, and Q1 pace sitter Zhou was on fine form in the Alfa Romeo, And yes, I did have to watch back the highlights to make sure I wasn't just suffering from heat stroke there. In fact, both Alphas made it into the top 10 at the expense of Carlos Sainz and Lance Stroll, whilst Pierre Gasly opted for the Sergio Perez experience, and by that I mean having every single one of your laps deleted for track limits. The rest of the drop zone was made up of Ocon and Daniel Ricciardo, who did a decent job to put his AlphaTauri into P13 for the race, until Zhou ruined it later on, but we'll get to that. Back to quali, and all we had left to go was Q3, the crowd going wild as Lando Norris put his McLaren on provisional pole, before Verstappen came by and ruined the party as normal. It looked like things would go the same way in the final runs, but then Verstappen didn't improve. And Hamilton, well, he did. This was just the aftermath. I wish I caught the moment that Lewis came across the line. The scenes in the grandstand were like if Abu Dhabi 2021 had just got overturned. Actually, in hindsight, people are finally starting to move on from that, so let's just leave it. For the first time since Jeddah that year, it was Hamilton on pole position, and while many, Lewis included, expected Verstappen to sail by on the start, every race I've attended live has seen the Dutchman fail to reach the checkered flag. Granted, that's one, but hey, one can hope for a bit of variety, right? Before we get into the actual Grand Prix, I've got to take some time to say a massive thank you to Head Out for sponsoring this video and sending me to the Grand Prix last weekend. If you somehow still don't know already, Head Out are a ticketing company that provide Grand Prix experiences for a large proportion of races on the 2023 calendar. They offer the best prices, availability and seats, which I can't agree more with. You should be seeing some of the views I got over the course of the weekend about now. One of the best things about Head Out as well is that they regularly offer giveaways allowing you to get huge discounts off your race tickets. And maybe if you get super lucky, get them completely for free. Using the code FP130 at checkout will get you 30% off regardless, so head down to the link in the description below and take a browse around what they have to offer. Now, let's get on to the Grand Prix. The temperature, just like the on-track action, had been hotting up over the course of the weekend, and as the cars geared up for the formation lap, we were all wondering if Lewis could hang on and take his first race win in 2 years. Okay, now we were taking bets on what lap Verstappen would get past him, but I'm sure someone was delusional enough to think he had a chance. Anyway, perhaps instead of laps, we should have been betting on corners, as a poor start for Lewis saw him drop down all the way to 4th after turn 1. Further back, and following his best ever starting position, Zhou Guanyu asked his teammate for advice heading into the Grand Prix, forgetting that his teammate was Valtteri Bottas, and this is where he likes to go bowling. Zhou welcomed Ricciardo back to F1 by penetrating the AlphaTauri's rear end, leading to a chain reaction which saw the two Alpines wipe each other out of the Grand Prix before it even really started. The race for the lead may now be over, but on the bright side, Checo had a rubbish qualifying again, so at least we could watch him battle his way through the field. Alonso was his first target, though pulled his 2021 defending out of the hat to hold the Mexican up a bit. As Perez made it past, it was time for the initial round of pit stops. Piastri was running second, and as the lead McLaren, you'd think he'd get preference on when he came in. As it turns out though, the team are run by F1 Twitter, or F1X, whatever we're calling it nowadays. Actually, F1X is probably something you'd find on a Lando fan's hard drive right now. Either way, that meant Norris got to pit first, getting the undercut on Piastri and making the Australian rather displeased. Just down the road, Perez was still battling his way through, easily moving past Sainz, though having a bit more difficulty with George Russell, who considered death through turn 3 on lap 28. Checo's race strategy sure seemed to be paying off. It's a shame the same couldn't be said for Charles Leclerc and Ferrari, provided they had a strategy to begin with. Leclerc speeding in the pit lane probably didn't help much, nor did the 9-second pit stop from his crew. Still, this is somehow better than their performance here last season. Moving on, and lap 47 would see Perez make yet another move, this time on Piastri, who took his upgraded McLaren car on a lawn mowing holiday in his battle to keep 4th place. We've spoken a lot about Sergio and the McLarens, but I'm sure you're wondering why I've forgotten about pole sitter Lewis Hamilton. Well, that's because Mercedes seem to have forgotten about him as well, only boxing in with 20 laps to go and praying that Britain could make up ground in the final stint of the race. Admittedly, that's exactly what he did, fighting past Piastri to secure 4th, though then ran out of laps to get near the podium. That means all we've got left is the bit I wrote into this script before the race even began. Max Verstappen coming across the line to, oh, and Sargent spun. Forgot he even existed, to be honest. Anyway, Verstappen would cross the line to take his 7th win in a row, and Red Bull's 12th on the bounce to secure a record for the longest winning streak by a constructor in the history of the sport. McLaren clearly weren't happy with losing the record, taking revenge by smashing Verstappen's $40,000 trophy when Norris nuked it during the champagne celebrations. There you have it though, and as I board my flight back to London, we can look back on what admittedly wasn't the greatest race in the world, though having watched it live I really couldn't care. The atmosphere and the excitement of watching these drivers tackle these tracks can really only be understood when you've watched a race live yourself. If you've never been to one, I cannot recommend it strongly enough. So a huge thank you to Head Out then for the tickets this weekend, and I'll be doing the exact same thing at Belgium next week, so make sure to drop my Twitter or Instagram a follow to keep up with everything I get up to over there. And if you see me at the race, come and say hi. My ego will happily take the confidence boost. Anyway, if you enjoyed the comedy review, be sure to drop it a like and get subscribed for more in the future. I'll also be posting a fair bit over the summer break, so you really won't want to miss what's coming next. A final thank you, of course, goes out to all my patrons and channel members. I'm trying to drop some early releases on those platforms now when I can, so if you want to help support me, all the links you need are down in the description below. For now though, that's all from me. I'll be seeing you very soon with another video, but until then, have a good one.